Huh. I can't go to the funeral. I'm going on a trip now. Besides, you haven't done much of wifey duties. And yet you were so selfish.
My beloved mother passed away after a long battle with illness, and it was my husband who lectured me not to impose his own common sense on me when I contacted him about the funeral arrangements. It's unbelievable. I don't know anyone more unreasonable who prioritizes a trip over his family's misfortune. Neither I nor the stupid man knew at the time that things would turn out so horribly a few days later. My name's Sally, 32 years old, and I work at my parents' flower shop. Many different people visit the shop, and I feel a sense of fulfillment every day. For example, people who order a bouquet of roses with a slightly embarrassed look on their faces to propose to their lovers. People who come to get gardening advice because it's their hobby. And Linda, a regular customer, was one of them. She was a very bright and talkative person who always made our family laugh. A few years ago, when I was at work, Linda suddenly asked me, "Are you dating anyone, Shelley?" I was surprised by the sudden question from Linda, but my mother answered right away, "I hope she meets someone nice. But Shelley is shy, so..." I couldn't help but blush. Although I had some dating experiences, I had never met anyone I could imagine marrying. However, my parents were probably worried about my future as an only child. Meanwhile, Linda, who found out I didn't have a boyfriend, said, "Would you like to meet my son?" That was how I met my husband, Edward. To be honest, I wasn't very excited at first, but as soon as I met him, my heart started beating. I was drawn to Edward's smiling face, which was like a blooming flower. He talked about his work, his friends, and his hobbies in traveling, and made me laugh a lot. We naturally became a couple and got married 2 years ago. I'm worried about Mom, so is it okay if we live together? My husband, who had been living with Linda at his parents' house, asked me about living together. If Linda, my mother-in-law, had been a difficult person, I might have hesitated, but I liked her, and we quickly decided to live together. I'm really happy that Shelley is becoming my daughter-in-law. Don't worry about the housework. Leave it to me. Shelley, just take care of your mother the most. I also felt like crying when Linda became a little teary-eyed. In fact, my mother had been in and out of the hospital after being diagnosed with cancer around that time. Her condition was not good, and my father and I were running the store. My mother used to have a good figure, but she had lost a lot of weight since she got sick. I haven't been this skinny in how many years? Although my mother was laughing, there were days when she was bedridden all day, when her body was not feeling well. For my parents' sake, I did the housework in my parents' home on the second floor between my jobs. Honestly, I was so busy that I couldn't even take care of my in-laws, and I was completely dependent on my mother-in-law. I'm sorry, Linda. I haven't been able to do much for this house. As I bowed my head to my mother-in-law, she smiled and said, "What are you saying? Don't worry about us, okay?" Previously, my mother-in-law said she regrets not being able to take care of her own parents. She always told me that. I was so grateful for having a mother-in-law like Linda. However, my husband Edward had a completely different attitude. I understand that your family is going through a tough time, but aren't you relying on too much on my mom? You got married, so think about which family should be prioritized. Oh, yeah, you're right. I'm sorry. Since it was true that I was relying on my mother-in-law, I couldn't strongly argue back. Moreover, when my husband saw me come back from my parents' house, he said,
Shelley, prepare the dinner. Hurry.
Soon after coming home, my husband began to demand that I do housework. He gave me various orders, but he lay on the sofa, laughing while watching TV. My mother-in-law, who couldn't bear to see this go on, yelled,
Edward, stop it already.
Her family is going through a tough time. You know that.
And yet, you come home and order her around like a slave. Who do you think you are?
My husband was surprised and taken aback by the anger of my mother-in-law.
What are you talking about? I married because I wanted you to have an easy life. I just thought it was natural for a daughter-in-law to prioritize her in-laws.
My mother-in-law continued to scold my husband, who kept making excuses.
You're just like your father, with no consideration for others.
With his mother's words, my husband sulked and fell silent. My in-laws were divorced, and Edward's father seemed to have been quite a domineering husband, and my mother-in-law had a hard time with him. She laughed and told me that she was the one who asked for a divorce after her grandparents passed away. From that day on, my husband became more subdued. But he didn't like it when my mother-in-law supported me more than him, and our relationship as a married couple wasn't that great. Meanwhile, my mother's condition worsened and she was hospitalized. The doctor told us that her condition was quite serious, so if there was anyone we wanted to see her, we should call them. When I told my husband and mother-in-law, Linda cried and said,
Shelley, your mother always listened to my boring stories with a smile. You must feel so lonely and frustrated.
I tried not to cry too much, but my mother-in-law's words made tears overflow. We embraced each other and cried together. My husband had a look on his face as if he had been left behind. 3 weeks after that, my mother passed away. I had seen her suffer through hospitalizations and painful expressions. But in the end, she passed away as if falling asleep.
Mom, you can finally rest now.
I'm happy for you. My father and I shed tears while looking at my mother. My husband and mother-in-law had been informed in advance about my mother's critical condition.
Please, spend some time together as a family of 3. Don't worry about us. Let us know if there is anything we can do.
A few days later, my mother passed away, and I informed Linda about it, and she said,
Let's say goodbye with a smile, okay?
My father and I were truly grateful for her words. But the words that my husband Edward said were unbelievable.
Oh, I can't attend the funeral. I'm going on a trip. Besides, you haven't done much of wifey duties. And yet you were so selfish.
My husband said that to me in a flat tone on the phone.
Wait a minute. What trip?
Are you serious here?
My mom has been in critical condition. Haven't I told you that in advance? Have I?
My husband sighed at my words.
Even if you say that, I applied for the trip 6 months ago. And it's too late to cancel now. Besides, it would be a waste of money.
I became emotional at my husband's grumbling.
You're saying that you would rather go on a trip than attend my mother's funeral? Think about it for a sec. It's totally inhuman. Shut up. I can't go anyway. I'm hanging up.
My husband hung up the phone after saying that. Neither my mother-in-law nor I had been informed about my husband's travel plans. He probably thought that we would stop him from going if we found out. I later learned that he had been secretly packing his bags in his car to avoid suspicion on the day of departure. When I returned to my in-laws' house and told my mother-in-law about the situation, her face turned red with anger. Even at the funeral, she continued to apologize to my relatives for her son's unreasonable behavior. Linda, please lift your head up. You did nothing wrong. You have always been kind to me, and my father and I are grateful. My mother also used to say that she was glad to have you as my mother-in-law. My father next to me also spoke to my mother-in-law.
Shelley is right. We are truly grateful to you for making time for our family to spend together at the end.
My mother-in-law kept crying. In the end, we said goodbye to my mom with a smile. I thought that from now on, I would do my best for my in-laws' house, as I had been relying on my mother-in-law so much. However, just 3 days after my mother passed away, something happened. As soon as I returned home from my parents' house to my in-laws' house, I noticed that something was wrong. It was already dark, but there was no light in the house, and it was quiet inside. When I entered the living room, I was surprised and let out a loud voice. Linda! Linda! I found my mother-in-law on the floor. Her body had already become cold. I panicked, but immediately called an ambulance. However, shortly after arriving at the hospital, the doctor told me that my mother-in-law had passed away. The cause of death was a heart attack. It was a sudden and unbelievable reality. I contacted my father and tried to call my husband, but couldn't get through. It wasn't until 2 days after my mother-in-law's death that I was able to reach my husband.
Shelley, I'm sorry about your mom's funeral.
Well, I'm tired,
so I want to rest at home soon.
Are you resting too now? The funeral is over? He continued with a smirk, and I told him, We're about to attend the funeral.
Huh? It's been about 5 days since your mother passed away, right?
Hearing my husband's thoughtless words, I became emotional.
It's your mother's, Linda's funeral. She had a heart attack 2 days ago and passed away while you were enjoying your trip like an idiot.
In a raised voice, I hung up the phone and sent the address of the funeral home to my husband's smartphone. The master of the ceremony was my mother-in-law's brother, my uncle. My husband arrived after the funeral was over.
Mom!
Everyone looked at my husband with cold eyes as he arrived in a panic. He was wearing a brightly colored sweatshirt, in stark contrast to our black funeral attire. My uncle berated him for his inappropriate attire.
Edward, why did you bother coming now? Shelley and Linda had told me everything. Do you even realize how stupid you were?
My husband's face turned pale as my uncle raged on.
Edward, did you enjoy your trip? Shelley had to work in your place, even though she just lost her mother's.
My husband responded defensively to my father.
Why didn't you tell me about something so important?
What are you talking about? I called you multiple times. You even turned off your phone, didn't you? Your boss and colleagues even came to my mother's wake. It turned out that my husband had told his company that he was going on a family trip. His insensitive actions and words made me feel really pathetic. Of course, my husband's colleagues and bosses came to Linda's wake as well. He fell to his knees and started crying loudly, but no one comforted him. Then I approached him with a certain determination. By the way, you know what I want the most right now. I want a divorce from you. I glared at him as he begged and cried.
Why? Why divorce? I'll work hard. Without you, Shelly,
Yeah, right. Without me, there won't be anyone to take care of your daily life, right?
Wait, are you kidding me? I refuse to live a life like that.
I don't need you in my life. After I coldly and calmly said that, my husband didn't say anything back. After a while, our divorce was finalized, with my father accompanying me during the discussion. In the end, my husband completely turned around and said to me,
You will regret leaving me. I'm going to be rich.
I felt nothing but disgust towards my ex-husband, who spoke as if he was taunting us. The husband who used to have a smile as beautiful as blooming flowers was no longer there. Moreover, to my surprise, he had quit his job. Or rather, he had no choice but to quit. After that incident, when he went to work, he received harsh, icy stares from his boss and colleagues. Unable to bear it, he apparently quit his job, using a resignation agency a few days later. When I heard about it, I was disgusted by his dishonesty. I couldn't help but feel ashamed that he had once been my husband. Breaking up with him was truly the best decision. Several weeks after the divorce was finalized, my ex-husband ran into the store with a pale face and pleaded,
Shelly, please help me. This can't be happening.
As it turned out, on the day my mother passed away, my late mother-in-law Linda had taken a certain action. She had changed the beneficiary of her life insurance to me with the intention of cutting ties with Edward. My ex-husband, who planned to support himself with the life insurance for the time being, was quite panicked after finding out about this. Yet, he thought he could manage somehow, as he still had the house. But the house had originally belonged to his uncle. Having lost his job and his house, my ex-husband boldly asked me for help.
Hey, help me out, Shelly. Can you let me stay in this house for a while? This is all because you took the money that I was supposed to receive. You should take responsibility and support me.
I retorted to my incoherent ex-husband with those words. I am deeply grateful for all the help your mother had given to me, but I have no gratitude towards you. Then my ex-husband turned bright red and tried to grab me.
Edward, stop it already. Don't come any closer to my daughter.
My father immediately appeared from the back of the store and pulled my ex-husband away. Then we heard the sound of a police car stopping in front of the store.
My daughter's ex-husband is stalking her. Please, take this guy away. Quickly.
My father had reported Edward to the police as soon as he saw him. My agitated ex-husband's elbow hit the police officer's cheek, and he was taken away in. After that, my ex-husband's life followed a downward spiral. He apparently asked his relatives for help, but was rejected by all of them. It was a case of reaping what he sowed. I also issued a restraining order against him. Since that day, he hasn't appeared in front of me again. And then, I rented the empty store next to the shop and started a flower arrangement class. At first, most of the students were regular customers, but now we have new students joining us, and we are enjoying it. My father was depressed for a while, but gradually regained his spirits and worked hard. My mother and mother-in-law Linda loved this shop, and I want to continue to protect it with my father.